I'm incredibly honored that Rashid Khalidi is joining us. I don't think people here need to any introduction. Will the most eminent historian of Israel Palestine in the United States, and someone who has been very influential for me and many others in our evolving understanding of this disaster, this catastrophe. So Rashid, thank you so much for doing this.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So this was really, when I thought about who I might be able to talk to about my book on the week that it comes out, Rashid was the first person who came to mind, and he was generous enough to take the time to do it. And I guess so. It'll be kind of a conversation between the two of us about some of the themes, and people should put questions in the chat, and I'll convey some of them to Rashid, and maybe I'll try to answer some of them myself. I guess the question that I'm curious to get your thoughts on, Rashid, is that I was very conscious when writing this book, and frankly got some criticism from, very legitimately, about why one would write a book which has to do all these questions about Jewish identity, when Jews are already so centered in these conversations, and when the people suffering by far the greatest pain for a very long time, and never more so than now, are Palestinians. And I've also heard Palestinians sometimes say, archly, that it would have been a lot easier if we had been conquered and expelled and oppressed by the Norwegians, because they wouldn't have so many identity issues to bring to the table. So I'd like you, and they wouldn't have a story of their own, oppression, which so often kind of crowds out the story of what Israel is actually doing to Palestinians. So I'm just really love you to know, what do you think is the right way to think about the relationship between questions of Jewish identity, Jewish history, and the question of Israel's domination and oppression of the Palestinians?
Well, that comment that you report, that it would have been so much easier if the people who colonized Palestine had been Danes or Norwegians, is of course true, because they wouldn't have had the most widespread narrative on earth, which is the biblical narrative, as a weapon for, in particular, Protestant Christian audiences. And that's always been a, rocket fuel for external support for Zionism. But that aside, and I think that's a red herring. I think that there's an argument that Palestinian voices should be heard. There's an argument, this permission to narrate argument that Edward made so eloquently way back when. But I think that to say that it's illegitimate for somebody like you to write, I think, to a primarily Jewish audience about primarily Jewish identity issues and how they relate to Palestine and Israel is wrong. I think to criticize this approach to what, in my view, is a very large part of the problem. Part of the problem, there are many aspects to this problem. There's a Palestinian aspect, there's an Arab aspect, international aspect, obviously an Israeli aspect, but there's an American Jewish aspect, or a diaspora Jewish aspect, which is that was always if there was a metropole, that was the metropole. And addressing how that metropole has fueled, financed, supported politically, and with bodies. There's thousands of soldiers fighting in Israel today who come from the United States and Western Europe. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. We don't know the numbers. I've seen numbers 9,000 French. I don't know. It doesn't matter. This support is essential to everything that is done by Israel. And speaking to how that relates to issues of Jewish identity and how that relates to moral issues and ethical issues that are raised by what happens in Palestine, it seems to me perfectly legitimate. In fact, I wish more people were doing it. I wish more people from a religious or an ethical or a moral or a legal perspective were being self-critical and were thinking about what, action and inaction vis-a-vis what Israel does and what the United States does, because they're both doing it. And what our responsibility as Americans, or other people's responsibility as Christians, or other people's responsibilities as Jews are. I wish more people were doing that. So I see a need for this kind of thing myself. And when students come to me, Jewish students come to me and say, what can we do? I say, well, work on your own community. That's the best work you can possibly do, in my view.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, definitely when I was my my thought in writing the book was really just about where I have a comparative advantage. I don't have a comparative advantage in writing about what's happening in Gaza, or even about writing about what's happening in Israeli Jewish society, or
Right.
or and so, but but like many people on the call, this American Jewish discourse about Israel is something that I've been kind of marinating in my entire life. And I hope, or I want to believe that that if you can kind of get inside the story that people are telling and that people have internalized, and first describe it on its own terms, which is what I try to do, and then critique it, and offer in analogies and other examples of other times where people had similar stories that turned out to be wrong, that we can see are wrong in retrospect, that would help people see things differently. But I sometimes worry that actually it all just doesn't work, because what I notice, and I'm curious what your experience has been on the other side of this, is that when I speak to other Jews about Israel and Palestine, oftentimes what happens to me, what I find is that they concede that Israel is doing a lot of bad stuff. Many of them do, but they say something along the lines of, we really don't have much of a choice, because basically the Palestinians don't want Jews there. They never have. They're never going to accept Jews living there safely. And so, it's rough, but this is the only thing that can prevent us from facing expulsion or death. And then it becomes a conversation about Palestinians. So I get put in this weird position of saying, you're not being fair to the Palestinians. Palestinians actually don't want to expel the Jews, or there's a wide, I say all kinds of things based on, but then it's like they look at me and they think like, how the hell would you know, right? You're just like a lefty Zabar's eating Jew who has like an overly benign view of the Palestinians because you don't see because you're not willing to see the reality. And so I sometimes feel like that it's actually Palestinians who can have more of an impact, because Palestinians can frontally confront the dehumanizing racism that so many American Jews and so many Americans in general just have about Palestinians, which is challenged when they actually meet Palestinians. But I wonder what your experience has been like as someone as a Palestinian who's been teaching American kids, including many Jewish people, for your whole life.
I mean, of course they need to hear from Palestinians. Of course they need to know Palestinian narratives. And all you need to do is guide them to Palestinian narratives. Say, yo, you know nothing about the Palestinians. This is a twisted, distorted, lying narrative. As somebody said in the chat, it's not about Jews living there peacefully. It's about Jews ruling.
Right.
It's about Jewish supremacy. It's about expulsion. It's about ethnic cleansing. And you don't believe me, go read what Palestinians say. Or go listen to what Palestinians say. I mean, I've been doing that for much of my life, speaking to Jewish audiences or speaking to general audiences, which include people who come back with exactly the same false consciousness that you just reported having to deal with. I mean, all you can do is refer them to Palestinians. Say, you don't believe me? Read. There's this huge body of literature. And by which I don't mean, stodgy, boring monographs. I mean, there's like poetry, there are plays, there are films, there's all kinds of memoir literature, which shows you the extraordinary diversity of Palestinians, and which shows that this one-dimensional view is actually a straw man created to justify atrocity and ethnic cleansing and so on and so on. And it's an old lying, deceitful trope. And you can't say that by yourself. That's not, that, let me put it differently. You're not the person who by yourself can demolish that. But I think that the things that you do say help to demolish part of it.